Awesome. So we got 3 more minutes, so let's wait for that to finish. By the way, um, this is open for discussion. I'll be giving my thoughts on some of my time at spending with delegations of Africa and working at United Nations and seeing how the Sustainable Development Goals have either helped or hurt the economy, and basically building off from what's the next steps. So if you have any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to interject, and we can go from there. So I guess I'll present myself. My name is AJ Lloyd. I am a co-founder of Kiji Ventures. We're a small startup working on middleware solutions, such as IoT, and building those on cloud-based infrastructure, such as Microsoft and Amazon. We realized that, from the blockchain space, that we wanted to create a common goal and a common bridge to social impact. I had technical issues in room 4. Ooh, I really hope that's not us. Okay, so please raise your hand or signal in the chat if you can't hear me or if there's any problems. So yeah, so we were building solutions in the blockchain space. I was working for a company that was handling IoT solutions for the One Belt One Road initiative for China, and we were traveling around the world raising money at the time, working with a really good advisory for building solutions for just data transfer. And at the time, I was asking myself, why am I raising money for others? I should be raising money for myself and building on the solutions. And I wanted to get into social impact for developing countries, seeing as my parents do hail from West Africa. And I'm based in Paris, so a lot of my time was in school doing my master's for international economic governance and my undergrad in economics and management. So I saw the constructs of how development should work. I saw how the constructs of how developing countries were leveraging or actually deleveraging themselves by becoming indebted to the IMF. And I wanted to see, is there a way to reconcile public economies or private sectors with public economies? And so one of the biggest things that we're kind of faced with the challenge right now is how to actually source local value within an economy, create that value, and then tie it to financial markets globally. And so, I mean, these are big constructs and big questions from that I guess were in my head as I was starting my company, and my experience being able to help on some of the 2030 initiatives for United Nations are literally the last resolution for AI, blockchain, IoT, and cloud-based architecture. Yeah, I helped build that and vote on that for the next 10 years at the UN in November. So I'm going to give you, I guess, my thoughts on the things that are happening from an infrastructure space. So how I see it as a house, and then how I plan on maybe taking some of those solutions and moving it to the next level. So once again, to kind of explain it to people very basically, you have cloud-based architecture, you have IoT, you have blockchain middleware solutions, you have AI, and then in the future you'll have quantum computing. We want to basically, we know that the space is already taken over by Amazon and Microsoft or Oracle for cloud-based architecture. So we wanted to figure out how to create middleware solutions for sourcing local value in developing countries to help bring that value. And we thought that blockchain was a good solution, but once you get into developing countries, you realize that a lot of these countries don't even have running water, they don't have running infrastructure. So how do you have to kind of scale down. And so that's the start of where I come. And basically for us, we wanted to create I don't know if someone had a question. We basically wanted to create a way to digitize a social impact vehicle. So that's currently what I see as the future. Has anyone been, and this is a general question, and I know people just ask questions and they just awkwardly sit as no one to answer. So I will probably, if no one calls, I will probably just call on you. But sorry, I also teach business classes at the university, so I'm very, very used to calling on students. But has anyone been aware of the term regenerative development? Let's see, Frank Smeets. Have you heard of the term regenerative development before?
If you talk about the regenerative or circular economy, yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. What about Paul? Have you heard of regenerative development before? I'm gonna take that as a perhaps. So yeah, so there's circular economy. You have basically moving from millennial development goals to sustainable development goals. So these MDGs were kind of based in the 2000s, and the SDGs are what we currently are using as mandates. But what we're seeing right now, and that's that's these whispers of RDGs, which is regenerative development goals, being able to say, okay, we need to get away from just sustainable. Sustainability doesn't create a viable model for the next 50, 70, 100 years. You need to have an ability for countries to have needs be being self-sufficient, self-autonomous, and also being able to regenerate locally the value such that they can use it on a global scale. And so for us, I see, especially developing countries in Africa, using I mean, if you break it down, it's really just simple. There is not an ability to track the value that's happening in markets. They're losing taxes, values on their taxes. That value is then being taken away from the global economy, which then allows, permits or forces countries to borrow. And so for right now, we're thinking that IoT is a really good solution, because what you can do is you can actually trace and put sensors onto some of the objects or the products that you're using. So then one, you're creating a automated supply chain within a developing country, very cheap. And then on top of that, what you're doing is you're building on top, you're building a, distributed ledger, you're building a type of recorded transactions that can be transparent and places that are, not the most sound when it comes to corruption. And then on top of that, you can source that value and bring it into the next phase, which is true social impact, right? Being able to fund communities based off of the value that they bring within themselves. Has anyone? When the word social impact comes to you? What is the first thing that comes to mind, Vienna? Have you heard of the term social impact before? Okay, well, so for me, social impact is I think the paradigm of what social impact is different than what is usually understood. So most people think of it as a kind of like a handout or a type of this feel good. Okay, we create this type of value that allows for people to get on their feet. And I think that this is kind of the older paradigm of thinking. Social impact for me is something that's not illustrative, but it's something that is, once again, it goes towards regenerative development. So it's taking away from this charitable act of we give you goodwill and you indebt yourselves, 10, 20, 40, 100 years down the road to, hey, we teach you literally how to create this value inside by tracking and tracing the products that are going inside. So that leads to naturally digitization of the products that you are creating inside your local economies. That might start pushing for certain concepts that are a little bit on the non-ethical side. So this would be, for example, are we putting in tracking and tracing for the actual individuals themselves? Are we tracking and tracing ID solutions? Are we tracking and tracing just the products or the individuals? Plus, are we putting that into a global database? In which, for some some of the blockchain people, you would say needs be for a decentralized data infrastructure, but that's fine. And I mean, these are the bigger questions that we were posing. So something I can talk about now that I've explained a little bit about how you can track and trace materials for social impact using IoT. You have a transparent ledger that allows you to track and trace the value that's being created by these products. You create financial vehicles that allow for social impact to create regenerative development. I'm going to move on to some of the things and some of the concerns that I've had that I've been seeing. So in November, there's this thing called United Nations General Conference. I'm actually based in Paris. So I'm, I just started my startup, just finished my master's degree, and am teaching business classes on the side. And something interesting was when I was picked up by an African delegation, one of the things that we were looking at were the ethics behind all of these infrastructures, well, ICT, right? And some of the biggest problems that I saw when you look at regenerative development, one of the potential dangers is actually the things that would help us the most. So if you're looking at artificial intelligence from a general perspective, one of the biggest problems is who has access to that data, who has access to that database, and who has access to build algorithms that allow you to trade information on or track, trace, and trade information. And something that I can kind of bring to light is the I guess the lapse of judgment from the United Nations when it came to making sure there were safeguards implemented for the next 2030 initiatives, for the initiatives that are from now until 2030, the resolutions that are being put on that talk about the ethical implications of that. So when you have ethical implications for AI, meaning that if you're using a convolutional neural network to scrape data to build a database for facial recognition, and through that facial recognition, you can now do valid market transactions. There's no safeguards currently being put on right now, and so there needs to be a call to us, people that are like us, that are aware of these situations, to start trying to integrate more into international organizations so we can raise that type of awareness, because you can't get regenerative development if the very tools that you're using are exploitative to the people that you're trying to help. I hope that made sense. So are there any questions currently right now before I continue? I don't want to just harp on. See people are coming in and coming out. How about Donatus? What are your thoughts currently on regenerative development, social impact, and ICT, information communication technology?
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Oh, okay, nice. I just joined. I'm trying to connect everywhere and see which rooms are available. To be honest, I haven't heard the beginning of your speech, so
no worries.
Just yes, because I had issues with my own room sharing my speech. So now on my mobile, I'm able to do that. So it's kind of that's where I am at.
No worries. No worries. we're just speaking on the terms of how we want to use social impact to create regenerative development in developing countries as well as developed. And then moving forward, how we can make sure that the technologies that we do use to create social impact, such as AI or blockchain, are not exploitative to, or not exploiting the individuals that they're trying to help. And if you had any thoughts on that.
No, just interested to hear actually opinions about artificial intelligence and all of this regenerative aspects.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a personal question, but I guess for my own pleasure, but do people feel like that it's actually possible to help people without exploiting them using government solutions? That's just a question
I do believe in that for sure. I mean, that's what I'm hoping, helping people actually. That's one of my meanings actually and purposes. Everything I do, every single project has to be helping in some way or form to people. So I do believe in that. Not sure about the government involvement though. I mean, some countries are just great, honestly. I mean, even though, there are flaws in most of them, but some countries are really, I think, performing quite well, especially Scandinavian, I think. I cannot say that about my country, sadly, Lithuania. I'm in Bali right now, but Lithuania is pretty sad.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your input. I think for me, what I am seeing right now is that the Scandinavian model is definitely something to model after, especially, for me, my thing is no matter how you speak it, no matter how you put it, even if it's begrudgingly, if you accept refugees and you're creating a space for them to be able to integrate into society, and no one else is, but they're casting judgment, then there really isn't a room for judging. And so, I mean, when I look at living right now currently as an American expatriate in France, in Paris, how we take a refugee solution. And I always think, as my company continues to look at government contracts and, look at building these, social impact bonds, for example, I asked myself, would this situation even exist if they had a way to create to generate local development for themselves? So if they, it's not something to make them rich, but it's something that allows them to sustain themselves within their own local community without having to depend for help. And I think financial freedom is one of those pillars. If anyone has any thoughts on those. Sound like you're going to say something, Don.
Well, I guess I would like to share that I think it's definitely would be possible, but I think it has to be a mutual exchange on cooperation, meaning allowing these people to integrate, to develop, to learn the language, and to be honest, to adapt to the political and cultural environment in another country, because it's not enough just to, I personally think, to come and get full support in some country. I think you need to be willing to integrate, and at the same time, people should be willing to accept, the commerce. And I mean, some examples. I lived in London, and some people are integrated pretty well. I mean, it's a melting pot in any ways, but people who needed some, I mean, let's say refugees. I mean, it was quite a complicated situation for them. So I think it's a interesting topic to be, I think, analyzed a bit closer from what needs to be done from both sides as a cooperative effort.
Absolutely. I think someone actually had mentioned, so they're saying, social impact, they've heard of it. I believe it's Frank. Worst scenario, further separation or polarization between people, which is true. And then speaking on the refugee issue being heavily dominated by fear, polarization being strongly played by politics. I think this is legitimately a question that needs to be taken into account, because at the end of the day, sustainable. Currently, I think that the sustainable development model creates polarization, because when it's no longer sustainable, people migrate elsewhere. The mentality that you get saying we've already helped you build a model that you weren't able to sustain creates negative externalities, and that negative sentiment obviously creates distension or discord within the countries when they accept now refugees or individuals. So I think
Yes.
people have to realize that it's more than creating a business model. It's more than creating these stats and these funny numbers. It's really looking at, okay, putting people behind those numbers, and then understanding how can you help the person at the local fish market who needs a $5 loan to sell her her product to make a $3 profit or a $7 profit or a $10 profit day on, day out. And then being able to do that instead of looking for help elsewhere. Because if you track that help, if you track that exploitation, basically it's, if she doesn't have this, she looks into going into the bigger city. If she goes into the bigger city, now she's faced with the dangers of being a woman in a large city, trying to figure out how to find a way to make money. If that becomes even more dire situation, then she looks for going elsewhere and will put herself and her family into dire situations, extremely extrapolated situations, to get to success, or to find success. So really understanding the storytelling behind it, I think regenerative development pulls that into perspective, instead of just fancy people who can say what they want on Twitter, but really don't contribute to the actual development. So it says, I have a question that someone says, AJ, can you again explain what we understand to be sustainable? And so for me, I think sustainability is being able to not diverge from your current situation, or to not denigrate your current situation. That's for me sustainability. Regenerative development is being able to ameliorate your situation day in and day out, on a moving average of per month, per year. And I think this is the problem that we are currently having. The current aid that happens, that is happening from a financial perspective, that is not connected to the actual local value that's being created in the markets. There's a dissonance between that, and therefore there's a lot of value that gets lost. That dissonance that gets lost, that value gets lost, is, we can quantify that in taxes, and therefore countries are suffering 50, 40, 50, 60, 70% losses from that value being lost, because there's no financial vehicle, there's no technical vehicle that is connecting the two, and therefore they have to borrow more, and that borrowing goes into the governmental resources of making things happen instead of the local value. So then you create a even further gap between the value that is happening behind. So really, what I think is tech allows for a certain technical innovations within the ICT framework, allows for us to really use data to give a storytelling of what is happening in the local value, in the local community, value-wise. How can we create a value add? And then how can we leverage some of those transparent technologies that allows us to create more value in? And it's not just developing countries, right? If you look at certain frontiers, India, South America, Africa, Southeast Asia, these are the next frontiers for developing business. So essentially what you're asking yourself is, you're trying to, what countries should be doing and what they're trying to do in a roundabout way. This is, capitalized pre-coronavirus. What they were trying to do is create a situation that allows them to reach out to more affluent countries without having to indebt themselves towards the World Bank, IMF, and other local financial institutions. And so they're saying to ourselves, we want to render ourselves more attractive as an investment vehicle for us to develop more on a joint venture level than a debtor to creditor level. And so I think personally right now, social impact, how it is, needs to change into something that allows people to be empowered, that allows to value to be tracked and traced in the local sense. And then once you take that local value, then you can distribute it and show it or aggregate it in a certain vehicle, financial bond, whatever you decide, and show that to developed countries, saying, this is our value. Now you may invest because we now know our value. So that creates a mutual sense of trust, that creates a mutual sense of transparency, and you're literally tracking one for one, or you're pegging, financially, you're pegging value on a ratio from this is the local value to this is what we're actually asking for. I hope that made more sense. Are there any other questions on that? Because if not, I'll probably just start asking people what are their thoughts so far. Looks like we have kind of a really good following now, so that's good. If you ever need to reach out to me, I'm contactable by a.j.lloyd. And if there's anything else, that's on LinkedIn. If you need any advice on social impact or how we see regenerative development happening, more than happy to answer your calls for that. And I'll probably just leave my information in the chat. Are there any other questions while I'm typing my info? LinkedIn. Okay, sweet. And then AJ at KG Ventures. Yeah. That's all I really kind of had for that. I mean, pertaining ICT, we already spoken about the ICT infrastructures. We have spoken about how those infrastructures build into creating value. We took that infrastructure and said, okay, well, this from cloud all the way to future AI and quantum. How do you take that value and trace it within local economies? And I want to capitalize on local because now that we see in a post-quarantine, post-lockdown situation, local will be the new medium of value, I think at least the localization of products, localization of value itself will be the new medium of understanding when it comes to do we invest in this? What is your local value in your community? Just because of restricted areas and restricted ability to travel, right? So I see a question actually. Thank you. Do you have an abstract model of the interaction model that you've talked about? Yeah, so that abstract model is just our business model. So yeah, I mean, basically for us, we are leveraging, so we're saying to countries, we want to help you develop a social model that allows you to, create a social impact bond. So the social impact bond market is currently $1 billion market. You can look at Big Capital Societal, they do it in UK pretty well. So we can see examples of this in actually developed countries, right? It's not just developing countries. I grew up in the East Coast and Washington, DC, in a underprivileged neighborhood. That those countries, Germany, United States, China, need it just as much as, Sierra Leone, Brazil, and, Indonesia or Thailand. So being able to create a social impact bond that allows people to truly translate the actual value that they have inside their communities, and then trade that to public or private companies that are trying to, obviously improve their image. It's always a game of optics. And so I think that the current model is great, but the reason why it hasn't taken off yet is because the incentive to invest into social impact bonds the incentive to do that hasn't really been found because there's no value that's being traced. You have a certain financial vehicle in the market, great, but that doesn't translate into what actual value is there. So think of it like as Tesla, right? Or Amazon. You know, you buy a stock and you are assuming that when you buy the stock that this value reflects relatively the value that's happening. And you can trace that because Amazon's $1 trillion company and makes, you know, year over year, month over month, billions of dollars of revenue to prove for that. But for social impact currently, for sustainable development currently, it's kind of a band-aid to a big gaping wound. And that allows for a lot of future market access, and that allows for new solutions such as leveraging tech within it, transparent technologies, decentralized technologies to build upon that and create and really show the difference between raising value, which is old type of paradigm, to creating value, which is the new one. But thank you for that. Are there any other questions? Just going to go down the list. Funny, Kelly, we've been in every single meeting since then, so maybe you have really good questions. Can you put references in the chat? Absolutely. Actually, I don't have any good ones. The big ones come from a lot of the private meetings that are happening through ICT at United Nations, OECD, and Red Cross. So they speak a lot about social impact, but you can look up Big Society Capital. I know that they're doing something currently on social impact, and that would be a really good Big Society Capital. Awesome. Did someone have a question in the last few minutes? Okay, and great. Well, to recap, you know, we talked about tech, ICT, information communication technology. We talked about how we can leverage that for social impact. Now you can use social impact to create regenerative development. Thank you so much for your time. I guess I'll yield the time over to our co-host.